listening to the Virtual CISO podcast, providing the best insight on information security and security IT advice to business leaders everywhere.
Hey there, and welcome to yet another episode of the Virtual CISO podcast. With you as always, John Verry, your host. With me today, maybe some construction people upstairs banging and drilling and sawing, and I hope not. That's why I'm sitting in my basement right now instead of in the office. And also with me is Conrad Agramont. Conrad, good afternoon. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Thanks for letting me come on board.
Well, yeah. Listen, I'm looking forward to this because this topic is an interesting one and one that increasingly in today's DIB-driven world is an important one. Always like to start simple. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what is it that you do every day.
So, Conrad Agramont, I'm the CEO here at Agile IT. We're based here in San Diego. Primarily, all we focus on is IT cloud services that are based off the Microsoft Cloud platform. I've been doing it for a number of years, and it's been, man, we really picked the right horse. They just keep adding more and more things, so it's been a fun ride.
In your greatest strength always lies your greatest weakness, and Microsoft to me is exactly that. Because you go in it's an amazing bargain what you get with Microsoft 365. It's a bargain, but every time you go in there, there's something new. And you almost need, and I can see why your business is probably booming, is because you almost need a full-time person to just stay on top of the advances at Microsoft. It's crazy.
Yeah, now part of my history is there's two interesting parts, and that's my history. But I'll just jump in. When I was young, my father was in the Marine Corps, and I go, I'm never going to go to the Marine Corps. I joined the Marine Corps. Then I get out of the Marine Corps, I don't want to go to the Marine Corps anymore. And then I go work for Microsoft. I worked at hosting, hosted Exchange stuff. We take customers out all the time. And then I leave Microsoft, and then now here I'm at Agile IT, and I'm working both for military things like the Marine Corps and work with Microsoft services. It comes full circle. It's a crazy story.
Yeah. So I always like to ask, before we get too far down the business, as you drink your coffee, maybe that's your answer. What's your drink of choice?
I'm not really sophisticated when it comes to things. Like, I like coffee. People are like, oh, what is the best coffee beans? Like, whatever one is in the order, the size that I want. If it's a beer, not sophisticated. It's normally attached to the weather. If I'm at the beach, it's a Corona. If it's cold, I'll get a beer. If there's wine, I'll take something. Take something. So I'm more of kind of a social drinker in that aspect and whatever's around. I don't like IPAs, and the only thing I'm passionate around drinks is go to a restaurant, like, can I have a Coke, please? They say, oh, we have Pepsi. Is that okay? It's not okay. It's not the same thing. So I guess Coke is my number one.
I have to say I'm disappointed, and I was going to ask you to invite me to San Diego because I love San Diego, and one of the reasons I love San Diego is it's perhaps the microbrewery capital of some of my favorite Stone and Ballast Point and Belching Beaver. I mean, there's some great breweries there.
I'll go for the beer and go drink.
You don't seem to give a crap. I want somebody who gets excited with me about the chocolate peanut butter stout.
I'll bring my brother. He loves all that stuff.
All right, so I'll tell you what. So now you can invite me, and me and your brother can go out.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
Before this devolves any further, let's get down to why we're really here to chat about. So, from my perspective, right, Microsoft 365 has become nearly omnipresent in the SMB, SME space. I mean, and it's really crazy. I mean, I looked it up in prep for this podcast. It's only been 2011, July of 2011, really, where they launched it. So you think about it, how much they've accomplished and how many organizations have on this platform in the last 11 years. I look at it and say, simplicity, just turning stuff on, interoperability, bundle capabilities, what do you is that what we attribute the massive success to, or what do you attribute the massive success they've had to?
Well, I think with Microsoft, one of the things that they've just, if you think about their long history, and even then, and even now, just their knowledge around enterprise business applications, where they started with, and having that knowledge and then saying, wait a minute, we're losing a lot of business to Google right now because they can just do all that stuff on a web page, and now we look old and clunky. Well, the one thing that Microsoft has always been able to do well is understand their customers, and they know how to make a dollar, right? They know how to make money off of things. And so, taking that approach of hey, we're going to invest into cloud and SaaS and, and kind of getting that going with the knowledge we already have around these businesses and business models and an existing partner channel that was out there. These small and mid-sized customers, they were getting everything they wanted, which is enterprise business applications in a way that doesn't require me to have a server. If I have a server, I have a network. If I have a network, I have to have a router. If I have a router and a network and a server, then I have to have a power supply. Then I have to have batteries. Then I have to have generators and gas, and I have to have all of these things just to send email, just to share documents. And so that's a place where I think they've done really, really well is servicing those customers in a way that appeals to them with less friction, and being able to do it with a company that understands, receptionists or administrators have to have multiple calendars and other kind of delegated services where, the old Google platform, the other ones that were out there were just like, but you just need a simple email account, just like, like Hotmail's where AOL failed and Time Warner. So I think that's what they did really well.
Yeah, I also think that I credit a lot of the success to Satya Nadella. I think that he just recognized that the cloud and online was the future, and it was more about where your data was even than the applications, and then of course they had to lead in the applications anyway. But yeah, I think what they've done is remarkable. So one of the things that they've done, right, and talks about understanding their customers, is understanding their customers have different requirements, security requirements, different compliance requirements. So we've seen that the U.S. government is increasingly focused on protecting controlled unclassified information, or what we call CUI or CUI, that is being shared with non-federal entities. There's been currently much more aggressive enforcement of those DFARS clauses in the DIB. We're starting to see some aggressive enforcement of FAR clauses, which apply to non-DIB, non-military, non-DOD data, right? Because the government classifies, there's 20 classifications of CUI, or 19, one of which is defense information. And the FARS clause and the DFARS clause both specify conformance with 800-171 and or CMMC. So a question for you. If you are an organization that is either dealing currently with the CUI requirement, or you look down the pipe a little bit and you say, hey, 2 years from now I should be planning for this. How do organizations determine whether they should use Microsoft's commercial or government offerings for Microsoft 365?
Yeah, so in the Microsoft 365 space, there's, to keep it simple and focused on what we're talking about here, there really is the three parts of it, right? There's the regular, we call commercial global kind of cloud, go up, sign up with a credit card, my mom can get one, there's no other paperwork. And the second one is the government community cloud, right? And for that one, so for GCC, that's basically a variation of the commercial. It's still serviced out of commercial, but there is some compliance capabilities there. And by the way, those two are, while they're related, they are still separate environments. I can't just move and copy paste, they're not like folders. And then there's the big daddy, well, it's not even the big daddy one anymore, but it's the GCC, so same kind of acronym, High. And really the High is normally aligning to FedRAMP High. Just like we say GCC, it's typically GCC moderate. So there's a lot of paperwork that goes into. So considering which one you should go into, sometimes it can be challenging. There's a few that I think are really important to look at. Number one, if you do ITAR, the only answer for you is GCC High. Super simple, because one thing is you're in all of these places where Microsoft is running it for you, they're doing their part underneath. Things you don't get to see, like their employees, the building that they're in, the locks, the doors, and they're going to participate in an audit. So if you say, I can get away with ITAR underneath, in commercial or GCC High, oh, there's an audit, Microsoft's going to say, we told you no, so it's not safe. So for ITAR, it's a really easy answer. The other two parts that get a little, that I think are good things to look at. One is, if you look at the service description for Microsoft 365 GCC versus GCC High, one of those things that they say is, when you're in GCC, we cannot guarantee support of when you call the support, when you're in there, they're going to say, we can't guarantee that those people are in the US. So it might be connected into GCC, that's fine, but the support person you might be talking to is outside the US. and I might need help. So, but I want to use person. They're like they can't guarantee you're going to get that. On the GCC High side, they say not only are we doing that where we can guarantee it's going to be a U.S. based person, but they also provide additional background checks that are more DoD aligned for GCC High. So,
Mhm.
now goes to the second part that's important. Just like in everything else, you got to talk to your government program office, whoever has the contracts or the contracts you perceive you're going to go get. What are their requirements? Because they might not say, "Oh, you have to have passed CMMC something." It may not be clear, but there might be something in there that says this level of CUI must only be accessible to and supported on, when it's in the U.S. and background checks. So,
Mhm.
that kind of tells you where you got to go. So I think those are really the driving points of when to decide to do what.
Right.
In
So,
general.
so just to summarize that, make sure that I got it right.
Mhm,
If you're going to have CUI, then
mhm.
you should probably be in GCC. And by the way, thank you for, I never remembered what the second C was. I always called it GovCloud. I never remembered that the other C was community. So I'll
Mhm.
see if I can remember that. And then so if you have CUI, you should be in GCC. If you have CUI specified, that is ITAR, then you should be in GCC High. Good summary?
Yeah, and everybody asks us all the time, well, which CUI? CUI is a large spectrum. It's about the program or the contract, and
Hmm.
and they'll also tell you how to then label and mark it, but you have to ask them.
Yep, I agree completely. So let's drill down a bit more. Do you get involved in, because we do, right? But do you get, like, typically when somebody says to me, okay, well, how do I know what type of data that I have, right? So I don't know if you guys get involved in those same conversations. Is this CUI? Is this not CUI? Can this data go into GCC, or do I need to go to GCC High? Is it just as simple as making sure that they're looking at the contracts and talking to their contracting officers?
Yeah, I mean, our specialty is really either getting you to the right part of the cloud, securing it, making sure you get all the data and safeguards. We don't really specialize at understanding, hey, let's take a look at that paragraph
Okay.
in the contract, and hey, that's what that thing is. And it's just not our focus. That's why we work with you, John.
I know. I know. It's funny because I've never asked you that question before, or anyone on your team,
Mm,
that question before. So, generally speaking, right? It's all about the contract. And unfortunately, many of the contracts are not as clearly written, or the
mm,
answers that you get, might not align with it. But I mean, fundamentally, right? If you've got a 7012, a DFAR 7012, 7019, 7020, or 7021 clause, you definitively need to be in GCC High. And then the next question is that you got to look at the classification of CUI that you have. And if you see EXPT, CUI specified with EXPT and it's ITAR, then you're going to find that that's really what got to go into that GCC High. Um, so, so let's say, and we're seeing this a lot, a lot of the DIB, right? Because many of the DIB are smaller firms, a lot of manufacturing firms and consulting firms and people of that nature are already in Microsoft 365 commercial. So now what
mm.
happens? They have to make they have to make that decision. Okay, well, oh crap, I got to move from Microsoft Commercial to Microsoft's GCC. What does that process look like to migrate to GCC? If it's different, what does that process look like to migrate to GCC High? And can you provide any ballpark cost for what that would cost a typical organization?
Well, the when deciding, so the big difference in terms of like a purchasing a migration when you're looking between GCC and GCC High, one is that the licensing programs are different. So that's the
Mhm.
first thing, right? I mean, you could go into GCC, and I'll call GCC moderate. We do this internally too, just because sometimes we'll say GCC, but we meant high. But anyway, so you're trying to go into GCC moderate, and it's you know from that, it's still a separate tenant,
Mhm.
right? So we talk these tenancies. So if you're in a commercial, you're in a tenant. It's just commercial tenant. Now you have to decide which of the other two to go into. Now, either one of your approaches, the licensing process is different between GCC model. And what's the big difference? When you're going to do it in GCC, say how you tend to have to. Some providers do it different, but you have to pay the whole thing up front. It is more expensive, It's not, click on a button, where's a portal, give me this. It's a lot of kind of headaches, whoever you license through, we do that. And it's a headache to go do those things. But that's our program. Anyway, so the licensing process is different. Second part is that there are some technical differences between what's in GCC Moderate and GCC High. So, I would say that about 2 years ago, there was a big gap. Now it's much, much smaller. So that's not as bad. And then the third part is around migrating it. Well, when you're migrating your data, we have a lot of customers who may have already attested that they're meeting our target, but they're wording or attested to something else. And so, you're not tapping into an ITAR environment or something and put it someplace else. A lot of times it's commercial to GCC High. So really got to look at the tools that you use. So if you're going to go yourself or through a vendor, you might say, hey, this looks like a nice migration tool. I think I'll run it. It looks cheap and it's great. I don't know. Is that data running through a data center not in the U.S.? No wonder it's so cheap. It's wonderful to have cheap people working on it, cheap things. Okay, but let's at least keep in mind that they're also going to like, how did you get here? Oh, it's fine. I just routed it through China and Russia. But it's super cheap. But now it's in GCC High, so I'm sure it's fine. Sure, it's fine. So looking at the vendors and their background checks, the applications, people tend to neglect it a little bit. It's like, oh, it's just a web page. You have to ask them questions. But in terms of the process, because this other thing is that many of the tools that are out there, may work with GCC High because they're completely different endpoints, right? So, that's
when
the
we say
thing.
Endpoints, you mean APIs?
That's right. The APIs are completely different. Many times they end in .us, or it's not just ends in .us. They change the whole URL to it, and it works the same, but then has different tokens. So the other part is when you're migrating, we often think emails and files, sites. It's true, it can be complicated, but you have things like you've been using, bought in Power Platform. And you're going to take those out. Oh, wait, some of those things don't migrate. Yeah, forms don't migrate. So there's other things that you may have to recreate, and that's part of the process. And sometimes it's not the blame of the GCC High side. Sometimes it's just the app was never intended to be moved,
Right.
to some degree.
So there's massive data migration, it sounds like. That's got to be done properly. So you've got to create the new tenant. You've got to kind of build out a similar structure. Then there's a massive data migration that needs to take place. And then as the apps might be a bit different, or all of the settings that you'd applied over here have to be reset over here, but there's no way to just click a button and do that. You literally have to kind of make
That's one of the interesting things. Like, well, I have these policies and I want to put them over there. It's you may have had a closet in your old house, and you go to a new closet. The closet's done different. It might be smaller or whatever else. A lot of times you're gonna throw away a bunch of junk. It just kind of grew that way, but that's not really what I want over
So
here.
you're doing a cleanup. Yeah, it would make sense. You'd be doing cleanup at the same time, right?
Yeah, I would say the two hardest things in any migration, no matter what, is in terms of challenging, like moving things, that's very straightforward. It's APIs, the applications you have, and your people. Your people is the hardest one, right? Because they're going to go through a big move, and you're going to get a lot of people, and normally the execs that are going to say, I don't want this MFA. What is all these security hoops and bullshit? That's not how it used to be. That's the hardest.
Okay, so I can even see that's funny because I think you're probably aware of this. We're a customer of yours, and we're working you currently, and you guys helped us do an E3 to E5 migration. And we're going through exactly that. Like the old authentication, the old MFA was being upgraded to so like as we're doing the migration, we're actually changing a lot of stuff. We have some legacy authentication in there. We had some legacy servers. So you're looking at this stuff and going like, we can migrate it, but are you sure you want to? Or should we improve it? We should, instead of just migrating it, should we improve it at the same time? So those are kind of like similar conversations that you're having when you're migrating someone from commercial to government?
Yeah, I mean the funny story, the whole podcast could be about this. In the future is, so I'm the CEO here, but I have a partner in the business, majority owner, John Gillum, when he brought me on, and he laughs about the story now. It's funny he laughs about it now. He wasn't laughing so much again, but there was a point, several years ago where I said, why is not everybody on MFA or doing these things? And it was like, well, John, I said, well, turning it on. He called me like 15 minutes later. What's this? I said, well, we have to do this. He said, well, I don't like it. I said, tough. If I'm going to work here and I'm responsible for doing this, that's what's happening, because as soon as something goes wrong, you're going to come at me and say, why didn't you force me to do it? So that's what I did. And some
Well,
of it's
listen,
because, you know, yeah.
yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree with
Um,
you more. Like, if you don't, especially as a service provider, if you don't have
mhm.
MFA turned on for everything, yeah, yeah. I mean, you're not eating your own dog food, right?
Yeah, we went to passwordless, not too long ago, and so we're doing those things. And it's like, guys, it's a little, less convenient, but if you want to, if you go into the bank and you want to go get to its money, the doors aren't just wide open, right?
Yeah.
There's intentional pain as you go through to protect.
Yep.
That's kind
Yep.
of the view.
So a migration of that nature, let's just use a baseline of a 100-person, company, right? Um, does that take a day, a week, a month?
Oh, if it's so hard to answer, but I'll give you an answer, even though it's
Well, you
difficult to
guys,
do
yeah,
it.
we all know there's
You
always
know,
it depends. Is the answer the start to every answer?
Well, I'll tell you, and I'll say this to customers, I'll say here on this podcast, most of the times there's not much projects that couldn't take a day to 5 days to go do it. Why doesn't that happen? People, right? Because you got to communicate them, you got to check them, you got to I could just hammer that the whole thing. If you said, hey, Connor, just move this whole thing, and I don't care what happens to our people. I don't care if it takes them, several hours to see what's going on. Like, the technology is not the biggest problem. It's the people. But the second part is a little bit of the technology. So when you do migrations, it's normally around the quantity of data. We've seen customers that are 15 in size but have 20 terabytes of data. They're in the data business. So it's
Right.
like, hey, we're only 15 people. Why is it so expensive? It's like, because you have a lot of stuff and it's going to take a lot of time and us checking and validating. So that same thing. We've had customers that are hundreds of people. It's like, that's all the data you have? Well, they're only doing it in Google and these other things. And they have a small company, but they have a lot of money because they have a government contract that builds, like, a special utility to take something special off of a special piece of equipment. And so they have a lot of people, but not a lot of data. Those can go faster, right? So that's normally the thing is how many people you have, how complex do you have, where is everything, and
Yeah.
the willingness to make decisions. And that's normally what slows things down.
All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
So I know it's gotten better, but I still think we're not at a point where there's full feature parity between 365 commercial and GCC. Um, well, any really significant deltas that people should be aware of as they're thinking through a migration?
Well, in terms of the feature set, once you get there, the big ones that are there, one is around voice. They still don't provide voice for Teams as they do on the other one. You have to use another partner. We use another partner to do that, and then so voice is a key one. One that's starting to pick up awareness in the community right now is a number of the AI features that are specific to, like, Syntex, Power Platform, and sometimes you think, why don't they just turn that feature on? Well, you got to think something like AI requires, a whole infrastructure of things that's probably well bound together and tightly integrated, and try to get another one of those things somewhere else and allow data separation. That's the
Right,
problem with voice.
right.
So AI is there, but they're going to solve that problem.
Hmm.
So that's another key one. I talked about the support area that's there. One thing that happens, that one thing that's completely different out of the box, is that normally you're in Microsoft 365 commercial. You want to invite people in, you invite as guests in, be a part of your team, other organizations, super simple. So that's not really there out of the box, which you would kind of think makes sense when you're starting off in a GCC High kind of environment, a little more secure and locked down. But even when you do and you want it to open up, there takes more steps to allow it, that you have to create a relationship with the other side. Cross-tenant collaboration is what they call it. And then if you want to do free busy, there's some special things you have to do there because there's different endpoints. You can't just do it in the UI, I got to do PowerShell. So there's some areas that are there, but you just have to be more knowledgeable. Again, it's something you run into, like, well, I came from commercial, I go into GCC High, why is it not working? It's like, there's going to be a number of places where you got to open up the sharing a little bit more, create other things. But it I think it's good because it makes you be more intentional. So it more aligns to kind of zero trust type of a thing, right? Which is, I should open up things gradually as I need them, not just have it all open and then I have the burden of trying to pull it all back in. So that's the different kind of
Right.
approach.
So I guess one of the added advantages of doing that migration is that you end up probably in a more secure state. And like I like your line, a more intentional state.
Mm,
Because I think sometimes we end up in places that we didn't intend to, just
mm,
based on kind of the natural evolution of change. Um,
sure.
so um, GCC is more expensive by a fair amount, right, than commercial. Like I typically hear things like 50 something dollars versus 90-ish dollars. Is that rough order of magnitude, 1.5, 1.7, something like that typically, or is that all kind of all over the map?
It is a little all over the map. It is more expensive, and it also is, like I said, on the Microsoft side, you buy the licenses. Like we're one of those partners that can do it, and we have to pay for the whole year. There is no month to month. Like, oh, you can
That's
turn it off.
GCC high, or is that's not
GCC
moderate,
High,
right? Right.
GCC
Okay.
Moderate, it's a little bit more moderately priced, and that one can still be monthly or the new kind of
Okay.
I forgot what they call the spending plans, um, but on the GCC High side, it is way more expensive. And you're like, why is it so expensive? Well, you got to remember they have to pass an audit with you, right? With you, because their auditor is going to want to say, well, let's see what they have, and they'll do it. So they have to pass an audit. They have to keep separation. All those things around them providing support that are U.S. based. That's not cheap. When you're
Right.
providing all U.S. people 24/7 support services that have government background checks, you're paying for that too. You're not
Yeah.
just paying for the, globally scalable platform. That's commercial. That's when like, yeah, these requirements are so much different. That's the price you pay. And if I were to compare that to where if I would have to do it in my own closet, it's phenomenally cheaper.
Yeah, and then they have to understand that the commercial infrastructure is being shared between probably tens of millions of accounts, hundreds of millions of accounts. I don't know what the
Worldwide.
yeah, and right versus GCC high is probably hundreds of thousands, right? So it's just economies of scale is a big part of it as well.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
all right, so now when it first came out, there was, as I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, they said Microsoft was recommending against and I'm going to call it a hybrid tenant, where you have some people in your organization on commercial and some people in GCC. And then at some point they said you can do that, but there's going to be some limitations. So where are we at with that? What are the pros and cons of a hybrid approach? And I guess real quick, the reason why I think some of our clients talk about a hybrid approach is they might be a 300-person organization, but only, let's say, 10 people in one group are processing CUI. And the idea of paying 30, 35, $40 per month per user to be in GCC for everyone just seems like a little extreme.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation all around because you're right. We have customers like I have 1,000, tens of thousand people organization. We're in commercial to move everybody over there would be absurd. Uh, so could we just put 15 people over there,
Hmm.
20, 30 people, 50 people over there? And then, and again, but then there's this mentality of that's the general one, which takes some time to work through, which is because I have a small group of people over there, it should be kind of cheap, right, to get going. Well, it might be cheaper for you because you only have a few people in there, but it's still expensive because it's not just a license. You have to set, configure, operationalize,
Hmm.
meet compliance for 15 people or 500 people. It doesn't matter. Many of the things like we do will deploy policies for customers and configure things that you need because you have to have them. And reflecting back what the government has said is we understand that it's a burden and no, you get no relief in terms of passing an audit and meeting the same controls if you're a small business than if you were a mega enterprise. Because at the end of the day, it makes sense. You're trying to prevent security attacks on something that's pretty important. So there's no way of skimping on it like you would something else. So
Quick question for you. So I think, and you took this in a direction beyond what I was thinking about. I was really just talking about run rate stuff. you're actually talking about the migration up front, right? So, and I think what you were
No.
saying about well, so let's talk about this in different stretches, right? Because you got the
Okay.
migration, and I can understand that the migration, the data moving part would be less for let's use the example of 50 out of 1,000 people. The data migration part will be much lower, but the configuration of the environment is going to cost the same because it really doesn't matter if you've
Yeah.
got 50 people in an environment or 1,000 people in an environment. I still got to go through and set up SharePoint. I got to set up Exchange, and I got to set up conditional authentication, Intune, all of MDM, all of the stuff that you're doing. So there's really no cost savings for the configuration side of the
That's
migration,
right.
just the data side. Okay, cool. So
Yeah.
understood that. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of the hybrid approach during operational, right? Because the good news, I guess, is I've saved money on those additional licenses, but I hear some funny stories about people not being able to join Teams meetings unless they come from one direction or the other. Can you talk about a little bit about those issues? Because I think I've
Yeah.
heard some horror stories where people made the migration, they didn't ask those questions, the AOSG provider, did not inform them, and now they're sitting there unhappy with what they've implemented.
Yeah. And when I talk about this, like the migration is meaningless, right? Because you could migrate data. Most customers that have that split, they're like, I don't need to migrate anything because it's just we're starting something over here. Like, fine. But you're right that those are the same rules. And this is what it comes down to is, you know, I might have 20 people in this GCC high space.
Mhm.
But in my commercial world, I have a lot of tools and utilities. Like I have this third-party IT support team. How can we do both? It's like, oh, those IT support people are they all in the U.S.? No, then they can, but they can't support any of the users that have any kind of aspect or touch CY data. You can't give them that control. You don't want to put somebody who's in, just say in another country with the ability to go into the commercial environment with the rights on their own to give themselves permission to go do it. You
Mhm.
can say, but they're not going to do it. They're nice people. Like first off, if you're in security, that's just a fallacy. Like you can't do it, and because it may not be them, it might be something that's acting like them. But the other thing is, um, the door's open. I can't pass an audit like that. So some of the systems you have that you want for efficiency, you're not going to have, and you're forced to look at it differently. What people can ask can do it, and then you go into other things like, hey, we're as a company, we're going to change what we're doing for device management. I have to do it in two places, and the device management I do it in commercial may not work in government. Now I have to be able to keep track of both because they're still both my companies. So one has strong requirements, who gets access, and the other thing, last point I'd make here is organizationally, you know, if you have a smaller group of people that are in the government space, you need to give whoever's controlling that environment, equal or higher access to the person that's doing the commercial space. And the reason I say that is because commercial people that don't understand government can make terrible decisions. So they need to have it's like you might have a CIO here, and you might have the person that's running your government stuff that's here. Yeah, as a CEO, I would say, like, I know the report's up to you, but we're going to come equal sets at the table when we do things, because when I mess things up on the defense side and the government comes knocking on doors, that's going to be a whole lot more than somebody else that just didn't like something here. The impact is just greater.
Yeah, I never really thought about the impact of trying to manage two tenants, right?
Mm.
So there's a significant operational overhead that could come into play there. And like you said, the risk associated with that, with the GovCloud side and are there, is more notable. Are there any, there are some, like any other gotchas, like, like I mentioned earlier, I don't know if they've resolved them, but I heard a lot of complaints about teams, between, an org that's got commercial users and GCC users. Anything else there that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so that you can do with cross-tenant collaborations, a setting that's inside of Azure Active Directory, something you have to create a relationship with both sides. And that will open the door for Teams communications,
Okay.
back and forth, there. And, the whole thing with sometimes people run
But how
into
do
these
you,
issues.
but if you do, let me just ask you a question. If you do throw that switch, right? If I have a team that has CUI access and I throw that switch, does that imply that now I've just broken down that wall and all the commercial people have access into that team?
Only in the
or
way
do
they
they
make it.
control it through team membership individually? So
It's both, right? Because
so
you can
someone
say,
could
I
make a
want to open up.
mistake. Okay.
I want to open things up. Like one of the places you may open it up is say, well, I want my GCC High people to be able to access our internal HR and internal IT places for requests. So, they're using their credential, they flow in here. That's what I want. Hey, do I really want to have a commercial person to have access to our GCC High tenant to get the CUI data? Like, no,
Okay.
like like, and you can prevent all those
Okay.
aspects.
All right. Cool. Um, so I used that term a second ago and didn't define it. What is an AOSG provider?
It is an agreement of online, was it AOS, agreement of online service for government or something like that.
Hmm.
Essentially, it was created because when GCC High was first coming on, the only way to buy it was through an enterprise agreement. And to be an enterprise agreement, you have to have at least 500 users in a 3-year contract with a 3-year commit. It's a huge burden. And so all these other customers and partners, especially that needed to be in GCC High, they're, obviously there's many that are 500 and above, but all the other ones 500 and below, they had nothing. So Microsoft created this program with a specific group of people where so Agile IT is an AOSG partner. We also had to pass clearance. We also had to, go through a whole process with Microsoft, because they wanted to make sure we weren't just selling a license, we were providing service to our customers. And are we doing the right thing? What's the program? Is this really focused for you? And they still continue to cultivate that. And in that program, what allows us to do is to sell licenses, for 500 and below. So, there's times we sell customers, believe it or not, 18 seats, and that's their thing, but they're like a research division, for something. And so, yeah, they'll cough up, a large amount of money to get it all secure, all ready, migrate nothing. They want to have a good starting point, and then that's where they reside. So it really is just a licensing vehicle as a partner to go do it. And by the way, to much of the chagrin of maybe some people in sales and others, we never just sell the license. And the reason we do that is, again, this goes back to my days of, joining the Marine Corps many years ago. And I felt if I give people a license and without any direction, any guidance, at least setting up basic security things, we have a whole platform of stuff we can add in that we should, but at least with the basic things that we're doing a disservice to them. And I feel like I wouldn't feel right doing that for them. So there's some deals we lose because of that, but just for licensing and not getting them in the right place to just start. Then talk about my migration stuff, talking about all the kind of insider risk security stuff that Microsoft can do. So that's what we do.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's one thing, it's almost like going to Home Depot and buying a bunch of tools and saying I can now build a deck. I mean, if you're not experienced, that you can actually hurt yourself. And I think obviously, especially if you're in the CUI space, misconfiguring something could have grievous impact on your organization. So making sure that you're working with a provider that at least makes sure that you've got the basics set up right makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
We beat this up pretty good. Anything we missed? Anything else you wanted to add?
From the AOSG side and
No, I meant just in general our conversation about what environment to be in, GCC
oh,
High.
I think technically it's possible. And the nice thing to look at is, like even free busy, that's a thing. Like, yes, you can do some of that, but there are some special ways. So there's a lot of these things that Microsoft is advancing and doing better. So, it's one thing we can see versus a lot of other vendors, whatever, where it's kind of like gets there and they kind of let it go stale for a while, maybe get back to it. So they're committed, including now that they have the DoD cloud and they have a secret cloud. So, this is all part of it, which is nice. But it does go to understand that if you're going to go into split tenancies, you're going to go 2 tenants. Remember that you are in a multiple tenant environment. It's not multi-tenant, right? Multi-tenant is 1 tenant with a bunch of people in there, which means you have 2 different houses. You got a house here, and you got a condo by the beach, right? Just because I clean my house, my regular house, doesn't mean my condo's clean. Both have tables, but different types of tables, right? For my house by the beach, I get special kind of beach chairs for that. I can't just buy the same, wooden chairs for my house and my beach house because the salt's going to kill it and eat it up. those are the same decisions I think customers have to think about when they're understanding these two tenants. They're not the same like tenants. They're different. They have different rules, different ways of using it. Hey, we use this backup tool. We love it. We've been using it for years. Can we use it the same in GCC High? I'm like, well, technically, if it works, fine. But where is this backups going to? Oh, our provider. Do they meet FedRAMP High? Yeah, no, but we think it's okay. I'm like, you don't have to convince me. Here at Agile IT, we just tell you, like, make sure to think of these things. They're going to go John Verry and be like, you're crazy. You can't do that.
And you're right. You're right. If they're not FedRAMP High, well, technically, I guess you could argue FedRAMP Moderate. Well, it depends. If it's GCC, but FedRAMP Moderate or equivalent is the way DFAR 7012 is written currently.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's like maybe it could work, maybe it won't. But I think every IT decision when you're dealing with that side has to do it, and you can't think of. But it's so much cheaper. If I just throw it in over here, I could save money. Well, how much of that savings are you really going to have if you fail the audit, and then now you don't have enough time to remediate it, and now your contracts come like, why the stress? But if you at least understand that, and again, look, just like you're saying, John, it's like you could look at the contract and say it's fine, but now you've like written it down, and now somebody's like, yeah, that's good, versus like, I'm sure it'll be fine. Like, let's just, hey, but Conrad, I just spent 3-year contract on Splunk. But can I have it? The thing go for Splunk's like, no, like, I'm sorry, like it's not going to work. But what am I going to do with it? Well, for me, that's not my concern. My concern is giving the right guidance on your GCC High stuff, and we help people in commercial. Same thing, So you having these two sides is not efficient. Having these two sides is, adds complexity. Doesn't matter if it's 5 people or 500 people. That you just have to be thorough about. And these are things that we've built a lot in our tools to be able to kind of work in two spaces, but kind of stay out of both spaces at the same time.
Yep. Yeah. The only other thing that I would add that is Richard Wakeman at Microsoft is an insanely knowledgeable. He's the guy in terms of like understanding these differences. If you follow his blog and you look at the tables that he's constantly updating, to me that's sort of the Bible of when I don't know what to recommend to somebody, or I'm looking at something subtle like CGIS data or NERC SIP data or something of that nature I've never looked at before. I'll always go and find his most recent table, and I usually get the answer there.
Yeah, for all those, like, they're good guidelines, and anytime somebody's on the verge in the middle, like, I don't know, maybe I can get away with it. Like, look, in the future, if something happens, are you going to lose money? Are you going to wait? Are you going to lose time because you're trying to repair it? Or, are you going to get fined and go to jail?
Mm-hmm.
You start thinking of those terms, sometimes.
With ITAR data, like I just had on an ITAR specialist, a lawyer, and with ITAR, you literally are talking about going to jail.
Yeah.
Right.
To me, that's easy. Like, oh, wait, is there a discussion of whether we're going to jail to which one? Like, I'll choose the one not to jail. Whatever that cost is,
Exactly.
that's the cost of business.
Exactly.
Like,
you might love the company. You might love the company you work for, but not enough to say, I'm going to try to save the company a few bucks and risk spending time in a federal penitentiary.
Yeah, if there's something like that, I mean, I'll tell a customer, like, ITAR, well, we can get away. It's like, look, you're making the decision whether somebody's going to go to jail on your side or not. I'm going to put in official writing saying I recommended against it for these reasons, because, or don't take the risk of that business. I'm a CEO for business. I either take the risk for the business, but I can mitigate it to do that because I'm saving, like, hey, but I saved $2,000. Like, hey, if you're sitting in a jail cell, would you be thinking like, man, I'm so glad I saved that $2,000. What did I buy with that?
Yeah, and the lawyer bill is going to be a lot more than $2,000. I can tell you that.
Yeah,
that buys about 2.5 hours for a good attorney that would maybe save your butt from ending up in that jail cell. So you didn't save any money. All right. So give me a fictional character or real world person you think would make an amazing or horrible CISO, and why.
Oh man, that's a good question. I was thinking about that, and I don't know. I think if I were okay, I'm gonna try and go deep on this one. Maybe Data from Star Trek would be a great place for him to be a CSO, because there's times, especially when you're doing I think sometimes when you're a CIO, part of it's not just the technology part, but I think it really good when it's trying to inspire what technology can do throughout the business. When you're on the security side, you really don't give a shit about any of that. You don't care about how productive and beautiful things are. You got to kind of be robotic. Is it safe? Can we mitigate our risk? Is it something that we're gonna, not meet a contract for? How we're gonna pass an audit? And it is robotic in many ways. There's a level of creativity of how to get those things, but not in the way like we just talked about it. Like, hey, I'm a good CISO. I saved us $30,000, but somebody might go to jail. And by the way, the person who signed that was you, CEO over here. So like, you're the one. You signed it, right? And we've seen over the years where the CEO signs something that maybe they didn't understand, but they're the ones that go to jail. So really, it's who signs for it. So maybe that's my answer, is that I think for security, you really do have to be robotic in how you assess every single thing. Hey, somebody can't get in here. Well, we just had this too. We had a customer trying to get access to our tenant because we're sharing them things, and Azure AD said, no, they're marked risky on their tenant. Like, we let them in. I'm like, no. It's just like somebody walking up to my house in the front door, just got blood on the thing and chains. Like, normally I don't do this, but it's been raining. Come on in. Like, no, you don't get access. So that's my answer. Hopefully,
Immediately when you started giving me your reason, I wondered why you didn't choose Spock instead of Datto. But that will be don't answer the question. That'll be for the next podcast.
All right, that's a good one.
All right. So if somebody wants to get in touch with Agile IT or you, what's the best way to do that?
Always go to our website, fill in a form. That's agileIT.com. I do some, have some things on Twitter. I think I don't remember what it is. I think just at Conrad Agramont. If you just want to send me an email, conrad.a@agileIT.com, and say that you got here through the podcast and you have some questions.
Sounds good, man. Well, listen, have an awesome weekend. Thanks for jumping on.
Absolutely, you too, John. Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree.